Let me just introduce myself real quickly. Dave Moskowitz. Basically a lifelong collector of scout books, primarily focused on early fiction and on dust jackets and dust jacket artists. I got my Eagle Scout in 1977, troop in Edison, New Jersey, Troop 318, and went to Philmont in 1976. Wound up with degrees in environmental science and a PhD in entomology from Rutgers, and have an environmental consulting company that specializes in really broadly ecological studies and environmental science. And I attribute a great deal of that to my background in scouting and merit badges that I took. I can't necessarily equate the two, but all the merit badges that I took all relate to things that I do today in my career. So um, sort of some kind of a correlation there. So I called this a whirlwind tour because uh, the number of scout books and early fiction is pretty immense. It's complicated, it's confusing, and it's a lot of fun to collect. And if you can take a look at the first two photos, this is my library upstairs in the one bedroom that my wife allows me to have for my collection. And I think I'm really pleased to be presenting, but I think she's happier that this is one night that she doesn't have to hear a discussion about Boy Scout books. So win-win all around. Um, Almost everything in the picture in the photos is early Scout fiction. Um, there's a to the left side you can see some merit badges. Those have been moved, and now there's more Scout fiction in those. So it's a pretty endless collecting topic, and a lot of fun. And hopefully you'll take something away from why I enjoyed it so much after this. So here we go. Let's just start with the complexity of early Scout fiction and what it means and how diverse it is. These are when the Scouts were formed, they took off like crazy, and they weren't publishing any of their own books to start with, and so everybody jumped on the bandwagon. This was capitalism at its best. If you put a Scout on something, it probably sold. And it's estimated that by 1914, 5 million books, mostly fiction, were sold, and none of them, or almost none of them, with the approval of the Boy Scouts. In fact, it was really the bane of the Boy Scouts that these books were being published. They first of all, none of the proceeds went to the Boy Scouts, and secondly, they were largely antithetical to what the Boy Scouts were hoping to achieve. So, but they came along with some really beautiful artwork. Here's a couple of examples. These were the first two were by San Gabriel. They published just a few books, and then by Platt, beautiful artwork, and then ultimately beautiful dust jackets. Here's just a few more examples. Certainly, the one on the right, the Chunky Scouts, would probably not be acceptable today. I doubt that you could write a book about Fat Boy Scouts and think that it would be acceptable. But just some more examples of books that were not approved by the Boy Scouts and that were just being published by a wide variety of publishers just simply to sell books, and very successfully. But it wasn't just books about Boy Scouts. If you put a Boy Scout on the cover, it didn't matter what was inside of it. So these three books that were published by McLaughlin, there's nothing inside of them at all about Boy Scouts. In fact, they're not even related remotely to Boy Scouts. But you put a pretty picture of a Boy Scout on the cover, and maybe somebody picks it up and buys it for a Scout, Boy Scout. So, but also just really pretty artwork. Just some more examples of uh, early fiction or fiction, right? Mostly from around 1911, 12, 13, that has nothing at all to do with Boy Scouts other than the cover. You have Ted Gilman. You put a scout on the cover with a flag. The one Little by Little, there were many, and I'll show you, there were many dust jackets from many series that use this. books for Boy Scouts. You put that right on the cover of that one and the one on the bottom right. Absolutely nothing to do with Boy Scouts, but you call them books for Boy Scouts, and hopefully they sold a lot of books, and in fact they did. Um, and then the Go Ahead Boys and Canoe Mates in Canada, you sort of put a Boy Scout on it, kind of looks like a Boy Scout, and probably that sold a lot of books too, but had nothing at all to do with Boy Scouts. A really good example of the dust jackets that were just being used over and over again. Some of these are Boy Scout titles in various series. Most of them are not, and most of them were just reused dust jackets over and over again. It was really the sort of a free for all in a heyday of publishing where um, syndicate publishers, quite a few of them, were just churning out books like crazy, both Boy Scout fiction and non Boy Scout fiction, simply to sell books. And if you slapped a dust jacket on it, use the same dust jacket over and over again, it probably saved a lot of money. But these two covers were used over and over and over again. In fact, it's kind of remarkable how often I'm finding new books still with these covers on them. And some more pretty dust jacket artwork that relates to World War I largely. Um, Kind of if I was a scout and during World War One and somebody bought me this book, I would have loved this. I probably would have stared endlessly at the cover and tried to figure out what was going on with the artwork. Um, One of my interests is in the artists, the dust jacket artists. Many of them are unknown, and there's a great difficulty in deciphering who they are. And um, many are unattributed, many of the dust jackets, but some of them are quite well known, and we'll go through some of them. But I mean, look at this dust jacket. You got zeppelins exploding. You got map reading. Just really fantastic dust jacket artwork. And to talking about the sort of heyday and how it was a free for all. Um, you had the Horatio Alger books with this artwork on the cover, and then when the Carter books came about, these are both published by A.L. Burt. Rather than redoing the artwork, all they did was just pop a scout hat on this cover, change the face just a little bit, but use exactly the same artwork that they were using for Horatio Alger books for the Boy Scout books. Yeah, it's kind of cool. Um, and then they were doing just about the syndicate publishers, these publishers that were just packaging authors were doing anything they could to sell books. And so one of the things that they did was they made up pseudonyms that sounded much better than the actual authors. And invariably they just made up names. So there is no Captain John Blaine, and he certainly wasn't a captain. There wasn't a Colonel James Fisk, and he wasn't a colonel. All of these are all pseudonyms with some kind of either scoutmaster or military title, with the idea that that might sell more books. Um, the trying to unravel who the actual authors were of many of these books is very complex. There's some really great scholarly work that's been done, but there's still a lot more work to be done on actually who many of these authors were. Uh, this book is probably unique and sort of talks about how interesting it is to collect early Scout fiction. This is a series of books that was attributed to George Harvey Ralphson. May or may not have even been a real name, might have just been one of the syndicate publishers' house authors. But if you look on the spine, it says Rathborn. Rathborn was a real author, and Rathborn wrote probably 300 or more titles, a very, very prolific author of not just Boy Scout fiction, but just boy series fiction in general. This is the only one that I've ever found, any book at all, Scout book, that has Rathborn actually on either in the book or the spine as an author. Uh, it's not known that the author of these books, Harvey Ralphson, that one of his pseudonyms was Rathborn, or that Rathborn, one of the pseudonyms was Ralphson. So it's sort of an anomaly of why they have that on the spine. But it's just one more of those mysteries to unravel in early Scout fiction. Um, Very big and prolific series. The Victory Boy Scouts on the left and the Hickory Ridge Boy Scouts on the right. This is the same book. And what's kind of interesting about it is the Hickory Ridge Boy Scouts on the right came first. And then they republished them as the Victory Boy Scouts. But you can see they simply changed Hickory to Victory and then scratched out Ridge on the printing plates and then just sold more books under the same titles. This is a really, really common theme in early Scout fiction. And if you look down at the bottom, just below the flag by the right foot, you'll see that the artist here is Caswell. Caswell uh, Caswell became a very, very, very famous artist from New York City. Wound up illustrating, and this is part of what I love about the dealing with it, digging into the research of these books. Became very famous in writing, illustrating travel books, traveled the world and would sketch on street corners for whoever was writing the book, would rapidly sketch pictures, but then went on to also illustrate the Villager newspaper, talking about New York City and the village, chronicled the history there, illustrated things for Orson Welles, but was very much lost to history. And his early scout work, which was at the very beginning of his career, is really not well known that he was the artist for it. Uh, what's also cool about this series is that it wasn't just fiction, but at the back end of each of the books was basically a field guide, and it was a field guide to animals, insects, plants, a whole birds, whole variety of topics. And these might actually have been some of the very first field guides that were available in the United States. There were field guides probably into the 1800s, but they were probably, or mostly the ones I've seen, mostly written for specialists. These were written with a very naturalist bent for a scout to be able to pick it up and then go out and find a stick insect or an opossum or anything like that. So just another way that they were trying to broaden the interest for scouts and maybe to sell the books. Um, and here's another an example of why these books are kind of fun to research and hunt down. And on the right is the original Victory Boy Scouts Great Hike, and on the left is an error. And the one on the right is the right title, The Pride of the Khaki Troop. On the left, with Joffrey or in the trenches in Belgium, is actually a mishmash of two books, two different series. V.T. Sherman was the Joffrey book, and then Alan Douglas, or Captain Alan Douglas, which was also a pseudonym, was the one on the left. There was just really awful quality control as they were pushing out these books. But when I saw this, someone had it in a box. It was, to me, it was just an absolute. This was treasure. Um, just another example of the lack of quality control, also very common. The same book by the same publisher in the same series, but one has the full title and one just leaves off most of the title. And if you start to get into early scout fiction, you'll see a lot of this. And so if you see somebody that's selling a book and you want it, always ask to see the spine, ask to see the cover, because there really might be something missing or something very interesting about it. So jumping into some series, this is the one of the this is one of my bookshelves, and the upper left are the V.T. Sherman books, pseudonym, of course. On the right of that upper shelf are the Schaller books, and then almost everything below it are books by George Durston or some made-up pseudonym. Most of those were published by Georgia Durston, not all of them, but most of them. And Georgia Durston went under the pseudonym George Durston, likely because scouts probably didn't want to buy books that were written by a woman. And so Georgia Durston, a very, very prolific author, published under George Durston. These are the V.T. Sherman books, really great dust jacket, and illustrating a really common theme in early Scout fiction, where there was a title and then there was a subtitle. And the subtitles are often more interesting than the actual title. But you just think about a scout picking these books up in the 19, 12, 13, 14. These were great, right? In the trenches, Boy Scouts in the sky, in a dirigible, on the front, tactics on the front. So really just, as I mentioned before, sort of antithetical to the message that that the Scouts wanted to send out. And so the Boy Scout movement really, really did not like these books, but they sold a ton of books. And as an example of the Durston series, which was published in probably 6, 7, or maybe 8 different series, all from these same original books. This is all exactly the same book, just with a different author, different pseudonym author, and a different title. The book up on the left, The Boy Scout with the Allies, is the original series. And then these books were just simply renamed and put into new series with different authors. And so, as an example, the last two, Boy Scouts, Chance and Holiday, that was the book just split into 2 books, just down the middle, so that they could sell 2 different books. And the publisher had quite a bit of chutzpah, because if you look at the the upper left-hand book where it says the Boy Scout series on the end flap, almost every one of these books had an end flap that was advertising the same book or the same series with a different title from the different series that was published, just simply to sell more books. So it was a little ballsy to do that, but I guess it worked because they sold a lot of books. But yeah, this is just the same book over and over again. The Fighting in the Cloud series for France, um, by Fisk, capitalizing on World War One. Just a jacket that doesn't say anything about Boy Scouts at all, but the book is all about a Boy Scout troop when you read the book. Um, and then the to the right is are mostly Ralphson books. Another big series of books that was reprinted over and over again. The same title, just reprinted with different dust jacket artists and different pseudonym authors on it. So all of these books to the left are all the exact same book with slightly different titles and different artwork, just being sold over and over again. Um, and in fact, the Victory Boy Scouts, these Ralphson books were actually, those top 3 were actually published in a completely different series, but named the Victory Boy Scouts, but not attributed to Ralphson, attributed to Robert Marcus, Captain Robert Marcus, who also didn't exist and was a pseudonym author of probably another pseudonym author. So as I mentioned, it's very complicated and very confusing and a lot of fun. The Schaller books, there was no Scoutmaster Robert Schaller, just a common theme over and over again. The upper book dust jacket on the left was the early dust jacket. Most of the early dust jackets were two-toned, didn't have a lot of color to them, weren't really very exciting. And then as they republished them or reprinted them, the dust jackets got a little more colorful. And you can see that in the middle dust jacket and in the lower dust jacket. And then in what are probably some of the hardest Scout fiction books to find, the ones on the right are true pulp fiction paperbacks that were reprinted by Arthur Westbrook out of Cleveland. And there were 6 of that. 6 of the Schaller books were republished in this series, which was a much larger series of books. but six of the Scout titles were published, and I just love the artwork on them. I mean, the Boy Scouts for City Improvement. I don't know why he's so mad, that Scout, but he's really angry. And the county fair guys is pretty angry also. He's just very upset that something was happening at the fair. And so these are really difficult to find. And if anybody has the other two in the series that they'd love to send my way, let me know, and I'm happy to send you my address. Um, and then there were lots of things happening with World War One. So this is the same book in the same series, but the first book, Under the Kaiser, was very positive about Germany. And then after Germany entered World War One, they changed the title to In the Verdun Attack and actually rewrote some sections of it so that Germany wasn't mentioned positively in the text. So another really big series. These are the Carter books and the Payson books, and there's a really cool story, at least personally for me. Um, this was the first, and that uh, bookcase that's open are all of the titles that were done by this artist, by Chris Shaw. He was a New Jersey artist, um, went on to great fame as a pulp fiction artist, and very early in his career, illustrated many of the Carter books and many of the Payson books with really wonderful artwork. And I this is the first paper that I published on Scout history and New Jersey studies. And I don't he was a New Jersey artist, so I just kind of got interested in him. And through Facebook, I found out that his 82-year-old daughter was still alive, Darlene Schott, and lived about an hour or so north of me. I tracked her down through her son, who's an architect, and she was very welcoming into her house. And I went up and interviewed her. And this painting of Davy Crockett by her dad was on the wall, along with many other paintings of his. And she, told me all about his life and really added to the whole story of his artwork, much of it which was unknown. At least it's very, in fact, she didn't even know that he illustrated early Scout books. It was kind of fascinating to be and cool to be able to bring books up and show her books that her dad had illustrated that she didn't know about. And after I published the article, and she was suffering and is still suffering, unfortunately, from some pretty aggressive cancer, she called me up and said, "Hey, Dave, I'd love you to come up to my house. There's something I want to give you." And so I drove up to her house, and she had in her kitchen this painting that was on the wall by her dad of Davy Crockett. That was the dust jacket artwork for the book you see on the right hand side. But I want you to have this. No one has written about my dad, and I'm so happy that you did it. I tried to offer her something for it, and she would have nothing of it. And so I just had it professionally cleaned, and this is it over the bookcase over all of his books. But to me, it's a very personal connection to a really cool story, and why getting into the history of scouting of these early scouting books is just so cool. So let me show you some of his artwork because it's some of my favorite dust jacket artwork. Um, just take a look at these covers. I mean, there's so much drama and so much action and so much motion in them. Um, to me, these are just fantastic dust jackets, and say everything about why I collect why I collect Boy Scout books, early fiction with dust jackets. Just some more examples of some more of the Carter books and some of the later books that he also illustrated in the Don Palmer series. But every one of them just has he was a master. It has just has movement and has drama, and you can just imagine having this book, and if you were a boy of 12, 13, 14, 15, this would be the book you want to open. At least it would be for me. But just to give you an example of some of the stuff that he went on to do, He illustrated 82 covers of Ring magazine to the left with many very famous fighters of the time. Uh, Many Pulp Fiction magazines covers, classic fiction with women on the cover, and many science fiction covers. He was really well known, but his early dust jacket artwork that started his career as Boy Scout dust jacket artwork was really not known. So I'm going to just sort of walk through a lot of series here, and dust jackets, and um, like I said, my focus has always been on dust jackets, but many books with dust jackets, the covers actually mimic the dust jackets. So these are the books by Ralph Victor. The earlier one is on the bottom. It's got they have these sort of somewhat, they kind of look like a photograph on them. The dust jackets, the cover boards are very similar in that they have that sort of picture on them. And then when they were reprinted later by Hearst and Company, they had sort of a prosaic cover, but it also mimicked the dust jacket. But certainly the earlier versions were a lot more colorful and a lot more interesting. And the ones by Chatterton are pretty difficult to find. The later ones by Hearst are not quite so difficult. And certainly without, and any of these without dust jackets are probably not all that difficult. Um, Walter P. Eden was truly Walter P. Eden. He was a well-known author. The books are pretty hard to find in dust jackets. Most of them feature, like you can see at the top and in the middle, either a photograph or a stylized photograph that was then repeated on many of the cover boards, as you'll see to the right. But one book in the series that, for whatever reason, does not feature that kind of artwork is the one on the bottom, and that's the Boy Scouts in Death Valley, which was the last of the books, and that features a stylized just drawing. But these books are actually, I mentioned earlier, most of the books are kind of schlocky and not that great to read. These are actually decent writing. Walter Eaton was a quite well known author, and his books read very well, but also kind of pretty dust jackets. Boy Scouts of the Air. I'm writing a quarterly column now for the International Scout Collectors Association Journal. These will be featured in the second article that I'm writing, which is coming out in the winter. Um, they had two different dust jackets, or generally two different dust jackets of the early series. The one on the top that was by Riley and Britton, and then the one by Riley and Lee. Gordon Stewart was a pseudonym, like so many of these books, but they have pretty interesting dust jacket artwork. And then, and the dust jackets are exceptionally hard to find, at least in good shape. But then they have these really nice cover boards that mimic, in many cases, not in every case, but in many cases, the dust jacket artwork. They're almost embossed, and I actually think they're really beautiful. These are big, heavy books. Also, not a bad series, kind of interesting to read, but a real treasure if you can find them with dust jackets, or at least dust jackets that are in decent shape. Um, Another series of books that was republished over and over and over again are the George Warren books, likely the pseudonym for St. George Rathborne that I mentioned earlier, also who published many books. Um, this is just a few examples of the dust jacket artwork for these books. They were reprinted in different colors. They were reprinted in various offsets. You look at the two books to the right, George Warren. I try not to get too hung up in these sort of little variations, but George Warren in the middle and George Warren to the right. But they came in different colors, and um, most of them are kind of pretty. I think the two to the bottom, the Banner Boy Scout series and the Boy Scouts Mystery series, are kind of ugly covers. They don't really they don't really do it for me. But they published 5 different books in that series in that dust jacket artwork. And again, these dust jackets are not attributed to anybody, and so who the artists were is unknown. But they were probably just stock dust jacket stock artists who worked for the syndicate publishers. So I mentioned that that all of this early Scout fiction was like the bane of the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts finally decided to do something about it. Probably most of you know this story, but they hired Franklin Matthews, who was a pastor in New Jersey, to try to rectify the problem, and so he became chief scout librarian. He had a plan of what to do about the schlock that Boy Scouts were publishing, and how he could maybe try to make uh, try to have their own line of books that maybe would compete with the Boy Scout fiction that was going like crazy. He published this article in Outlook in 1914 called "Blowing Out the Boys' Brains," and just as it sounds like, it was about parents letting their boys read early non-authorized Boy Scout fiction, and it was essentially corrupting them. Sort of the modern video game, or anything in our generation. Maybe it would have been Hardy Boys. I don't know, but he wanted to do something about it, and so he very aggressively attacked the problem with success, in that the Boy Scouts sold a lot of books that were either published by the Boy Scouts, or were by authors that were writing books that were um, approved by the Boy Scouts, many famous artists. But he was not able to shut down how successful the non-authorized Boy Scout fiction was. So one of the first things that he did was that Matthews hired Percy Fitzhugh, another New Jersey author, and Fitzhugh started a series of books, which everybody knows about, the Tom Slade books, and they follow they follow a Boy Scout troop from Bridgeboro, New Jersey. There is a Bridgeboro, New Jersey, but it doesn't link with these stories. These stories were probably from Hackensack, New Jersey, where Fitzhugh was from, and then from surrounding scout camps and hikes that would have been up in northern New Jersey and in surrounding New York. But these were very, very successful books. And as you can see on the right, that's every one of the Fitzhugh books. So he wrote a lot of books. He was a very successful author. Um, the Tom Slade books first started with a photograph, or a stylized photograph on the cover. And then when they were republished later, to some success, but not the success of the originals, they were published as a Tom Slade story with this cream colored dust jacket on them. Every one of the Tom Slade books has this stylized artwork of either a photo or an enhanced photo, except the very last one in the series, which was the parachute jumper up on the right, which is a very, very difficult dust jacket to find, and a difficult book to find as well. But these books actually are well written, and if you're from New Jersey or New York and you read them, you might actually know where some of these were written, and some of the places that they visit. After that, and came Roy Blakely's, and I say after that for all of these, but he was such a prolific writer. He was writing all of these series at the same time. He started with Tom Slade, but as Tom Slade grew, he was interfacing all these other series at the same time. So that's pretty amazing. The Roy Blakely books, the same cover over and over again, the same dust jacket artwork, but with a different title on them. They're kind of interesting dust jackets, I guess. Maybe they thought that Roy Blakely wasn't selling quite so well with that dust jacket, so then they switched to the next series, the Pee Wee Harris series, about little Pee Wee Harris, and you can see him in the middle there on the Pee Wee Harris Adrift. But these dust jackets are very different than the Roy Blakely series and have a lot of drama to them. You know, but sort of ridiculous, right? Pee Wee Harris in Darkest Africa, Sunken Treasure, great adventure stories for a 14 or 15 or 16-year old to read. And really spectacular dust jacket artwork. And then on the bottom, approved by the Boy Scouts of America, to show that these were different than just the Boy Scout fiction books, the non-authorized books. The next series was the Westy Martin series, a smaller series, but also all about Boy Scouts out west. Um, and Again, just my interest, as you can see, is in dust jackets and the artwork, but pretty fantastic artwork on the covers. The one on the bottom right, Westy Martin on the Mississippi, a really difficult dust jacket to find. And was I believe the last in the series. Typically, the last in the series is the hardest to find. And then it was republished as Out West with Westy Martin. You know, the complete book for boys in one big volume, and it combined four of these books into one. And then I'll say a series. It wasn't quite a series, but six books that were published under Percy Keith Fitzhugh's name, but were probably written by other authors, by ghostwriters. It may be that one or two of these were written by him, but mostly by ghostwriters. And they sort of follow scouting and have various themes to them, but none of these are cohesive. They don't tell a story from book one to the end of the series, and the people don't necessarily show up again and again. But they got pretty cool dust jacket art. And then in 1915, very early on, um, Matthews started the Boy Scouts yearbook series, which would run all the way until 1945. And many of these books were reprinted stories from Boy's life, or he would get other columns that had been written, and he would put them in sort of compendiums. But they all feature, or certainly the early ones, feature this really spectacular dust jacket artist by very famous artists like Remington Schuler, who was a very famous Western artist. Um, the one on the left, I'm not sure who the artist is on that one, but the dust jacket artist on this left one doesn't have a dust jacket. But I mean, just look at that book; it's pretty spectacular artwork. Uh, to the right are the Scout, Boy Scout yearbooks that I have, mostly with dust jackets. Not all of them with dust jackets. They're very difficult to find with dust jackets in good shape. But to the left is an example of some of the artwork that were on these Lindbergh and Indians and um, patriotic themes of scouts. But these were books. These are big books. They're big, heavy books, and multiple stories that you could read throughout them. Probably something that you would mostly get as like a Christmas gift. Just some more artwork of what many of these books look like, what the dust jacket artwork looked like, and they came in both the Boy Scouts yearbook, and then they were also published as just the Boy Scouts book. There's a few titles like the two that you see on the bottom left that weren't yearbooks, but they were still compendiums of stories for Boy Scouts. But also, I mean, just great titles: Adventure, It's Flyers, and Ghost and Mystery Stories. Just Daring and Danger. Really great titles. And then very early on, um, Matthews created the Every Boy's Library books of true Boy Scout fiction by famous authors, mostly reprinted books, classic books by very classic authors: Jack London, Fitzhugh, Seton, Stevenson, really many famous authors. And there were 73 titles that were printed. They came in a variety of dust jackets. The earliest ones are, you'll see the Handbook for Boys, that was a very generalized cover. And then the one next to it by Dan Beard that had a little bit of artwork to it. And then later editions like Jack London, The Call of the Wild, that had very stylized artwork to them. These are very really easy to collect without dust jackets. Pretty difficult to collect with dust jackets, partly because there's just so many varieties. Many of these books had all three of these covered, these dust jackets that were printed. Some might have only had one, but it probably takes 73 books to, I don't know, 150 or more if you tried to collect all of the dust jacket variations. And the spines without the books without dust jackets also have variations in what the covers look like. So that's something that can be attacked. I've tried really hard to focus on the dust jacket artwork because I find it really pretty exciting. And then this is my sort of non-series corner, although many of these are series, but they were typically shorter series. One, maybe two, three, four books, or maybe even just one book and not really a series. Um, but again, also featuring pretty spectacular dust jacket artwork. Um, this is it's a nonfiction book, or I guess it's sort of a link between nonfiction and fiction. This is the Edward Cave book or books, the Boy Scouts hike book and the camp book, and then combined into the hike and camp book. But uh, this was one of the very first books that was illustrated by Norman Rockwell before he achieved great artistic fame. And you can see in the middle there, to the right, the illustration. So these books are filled with Rockwell artwork. And again, very early, 1912, 13, before he really took off as a Boy Scout artist and just as a general artist of Americana. Um, Another little cool series called The Fox Patrol has a kind of interesting historical story behind it. These were published by Charles Gilman, who was a very famous newspaper writer from Minneapolis, also a well-known naturalist, angler, hunter, guns right advocate, and he was commissioned by the B.S.A Company in 1912, B.S.A Company out of Minneapolis, to write these three books. They were all published in 1912. These are the only Boy Scout books he wrote, and these are the only Boy Scout books that were published by the B.S.A Company. The B.S.A Company, the artist for these books was Lee Merrow, who would go on to become an extremely famous artist, Art Deco artist of greeting cards, inspirational posters, and Art Deco artwork, architecture as well. And he became the chief artist for the B.S.A Company. The B.S.A Company would essentially be the start of the greeting card industry and the inspirational poster industry. Became extremely famous for that out of Minneapolis. These books were sold in nice boxes like the one on the right, which is the only one that I've ever seen. And they so you would get one book in a box. But the story behind it is the reason why I find sort of delving into the research of these really interesting. And here's some of the kind of inspirational posters, or these are little frame things. They always came framed, by the way, that the B.S.A Company would sell. Here's the Boy Scout Creed in various artwork, but there was everything, not just Boy Scouts, anything inspirational you can think of, poetry, artwork, stories about your mom, stories about a dad, stories about a brother, and these were just endlessly sold by the B.S.A Company, and they're kind of pretty also. Um, Here's a very early book called The Cat Scouts by Louis Wayne and Jesse Pope. Louis Wayne would go on to pretty spectacular fame as an artist, but this is about a cat scout troop, It was published in England, but there was one edition published in 1911 or 12 by the in the United States. But Jessie Pope was a woman. She would go on to become a very famous British suffragist poet. But her claim to fame was that she wrote inspirational poems to try to stimulate or try to get um, young British men to enlist in the war in World War I. So her early poetry was sort of inspirational about why young men should enlist in World War I in the British Army or the British military. But it's a kind of a cool story, and it's all about a cat troop and their scoutmaster getting into all kinds of trouble. Just some examples of series books and the Dust Jacket artwork. Ames was a very famous author, wrote quite a bit of Boy Scout fiction and many other books. Of course, Gordon Burgess would go on to great fame, and so would Richard Harding Davis. Howard Garris was a very famous artist, author, and wrote quite a few Boy Scout books, and Ellis as well. There was a very common theme in these non-authorized books, or largely non-authorized books, for the publishers to go and get very famous authors to write stories about Boy Scouts. Just some more examples. Um, just as you can probably tell, I'm pretty fascinated by Dust Jacket artwork. Uh, Especially since so many of these artists are not well known, and it's just an endless opportunity to search newspapers.com or other kinds of resources to try to find out who the Dust Jacket artists are. And kind of Bob's Hike to the Holy City, a parable about Christianity and Boy Scouts, and how the two kind of combine, and how scouting led Bob to the Holy City, and how that was inspirational for him. Some more great Dust Jacket artwork. Um, just by Arthur Stanwood Peer would go on to great fame, and so would Rudyard Kipling. Um, Eldred and Halinger would both go on to great fame, and Scoville as well. And these are all from probably sometime around 1911 to 1915, 16. These books were republished over and over again until the Depression hit, and then there really wasn't any money to buy these books. And that's when the syndicate publishers really just sort of tailed off and book sales really plummeted. And just a few more. Lucky Lindy, and on the bottom, the Elmer Sherwood books that were republished over and over again, or in many, many, many different. Well, that's all I have. I said it would be Whirlwind, but earlier I was asked yesterday to put up one of my favorite covers to hopefully have other people share theirs. And of course, this is Herbert Carter. And out of all the great Dust Jackets and pulp artwork that he did, and the stories that the Dust Jackets tell, this is just one of my favorites. I mean, you got that dead ram there, and you got these eagles coming at this scout, and he's trying to beat them off with a stick. It just evokes like just great drama. So that's my book, my favorite book among many favorites.
For those who are interested, Doug Bierce, and I'm going to forget his first name, but Fisk. If somebody knows who that, I'm just forgetting.
It's Chuck.
They did the first real good reference book on Boy Scout fiction and Boy Scout books, and I believe Doug just released a new edition of that. Am I correct?
He did, but I would, without disparaging the second edition, I would highly
Yeah.
recommend getting the first edition.
Yep.
It
Yeah.
it is a resource that is
Yeah.
unparalleled.
Yeah.
The scholarly research in it is amazing. It's a checklist. It has a lot of biographical
Yeah.
information about artists, and jackets. And I would add, there's a couple other books that are great too. There's Jeff Rhodes' book on the issue series, which is also great.
Mhm.
And there is, gosh, I can't think of the author. There's a great book on the Every Boy's Library as well, which
Yeah.
which really should, even if you don't collect these books, all three of these should be in your library because they just speak to the history of scouting. They're really
Yeah.
just interesting to read.
I would offer also add one, and you may know this, but this is in the book trade. This is considered the Bible on the boys series, and it's by Ed Matson. It's the Collector's Guide to Hardcover Boys books, and he amassed similar to your collection, an
So
outstanding.
quite a bit of my collection is his collection. He was
Oh, okay,
I stopped my daughter lived in Virginia or still lives in Virginia, and I realized that he was on the way down, and he was kind enough to invite me to his house one day, and I told him what I was collecting and my interests. And when I got down there, he had all of his scout books pulled out on a table and said, "Listen, these are not my these are." He was a bookseller, of course, and wanted to
right,
make that these are not really my interest, and let's make a deal. And I came home with about 50 books
yeah.
at a just an astonishing price.
Do you
Well,
want
I
to mention about your library protection, storage, and making sure that the stuff stays intact?
Sure. So many, it's a really good point. Many of these books are really off printed on terrible paper. They were really cheap, and they were sold to the masses. So they've got that highly acidic paper, true like pulp fiction kind of paper. There's not a lot you can do about that other than to store them in a relatively dry and climate controlled place. Every book I have is in an archival dust jacket. I get mine from Brodart. They have a non-PVC cover on them, and then an acid-free paper that separates the dust jacket from the plastic, whatever that plastic is made out of. And then in the room, it's in an upstairs bedroom, which doesn't get real warm or real cold. But when it does get warm, I have an air conditioner, a window unit in there. I keep it at around 72 degrees, so that just so a lot of humidity doesn't build up. But and then for many of those books I mentioned that don't have dust jackets, or that I don't have it with dust jackets, have some kind of a printed picture on the front. It may be a paste in or some kind of a cover. Those get archival plastic on them as well, even though I don't pull them in and out of the shelves very often. If they're going to rub up against another book, you want to have something on them to protect them so that they're not touching another book, which might be very acidic and might damage that cover as well. So that's a really good point.